Greetings and salutations, and thank you for clicking on the video. This time around we're going to talk about a turntable. It's the Pioneer Pl-990. No, this video is not going to be about Linux, and those of you who are new to my channel, recent subscribers, might be scratching your head going, well, why is he posting a video like this? Well, a long time ago, that's what this channel used to be about. When I first started out, I was talking about things like turntables and tape recorders and speakers and amplifiers and all kinds of groovy things like that. I love music. I love audio. When I first started in school, serious school, I was training to be a radio engineer. So this is another color in my rainbow, and I reserve the right to post videos about other colors in my rainbow besides the one that looks like Linux. Did that make sense? I don't know. I'm tired and it's late, gang. Unfortunately, I am not going to have any moving pictures in this video. You will not see this turntable in action. I was originally going to try and get some video to share with you guys, but my main camera died not too long ago, and I was going to do it on a phone, and the phone has a crappy camera in it, and the quality wasn't there, and I just said, I ain't doing that. So I just took some still pictures, and I'm just going to ramble on about it for a bit. I was originally just going to share this video with my friends in the Facebook group that I have called JC's PhonoWorks, where a bunch of us audio geeks hang out, but then I thought, hey, I'll throw it up on YouTube and see whether some of you guys might like that, And if you don't, you're more than welcome to watch something else. So let's talk a little bit about the Pl-990. It is a very cheap turntable, price-wise, and it's been around for a long time. It's an old design. The owner's manual is copyright 1996, if that tells you anything. So they've been printing the same manual for all of that time. And I know that there were several turntables that were built with this basic chassis that were sold by other companies under different names. Sony had one, and Radio Shack sold one that looked a lot like this, maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s. I don't know how long that was in production, but I remember seeing that in somebody's video. So there were a lot of different models that were based on this same design. And each one of those models had different features. Some of them had USB outputs, some of them didn't, some of them had no preamplifier built in, some had a switch that you could switch back and forth, and this one just has a preamp. There is no way to bypass the preamp, so it's really designed just to be plugged into a line level input, like on the back of an amplifier that does not have a built-in phono preamp, or maybe directly into a computer or something like that. And there are some other features about this that make it kind of unique. So as we roll along, I will talk about them. This is the box that it came in. I paid $119 for this turntable from B&H Photo in New York City. I did not have to pay any tax because I don't live in New York State, and the shipping was free. So I just could not pass it up. The price on this turntable has been kind of hovering around $150 to $175 depending on where you would get it, and then it went down, and so therefore I said, well, I'm going to jump on that. Pioneer has introduced a lot of new models into the market lately. They have 3 or 4 new turntable models out there, and I'm thinking maybe they're probably going to retire this, and I've kind of wanted one for a long time, so I had to jump on it. It was just, I'm going to go ahead and get it now. So, and what's kind of interesting about that is that the last cartridge that I bought for one of my other turntables was, I spent like $180 on it. That's just for the cartridge. It's not for a whole turntable. It's just the part that sticks on the end of the Tonearm that plays the records. So it's kind of insane. You might be saying to yourself, well, why would you want this turntable? There's several reasons for that. First of all, this turntable is fun. It just looks like a lot of fun to me. And also, it is the closest thing to a quote-unquote standard player that I have come across. And I'll talk more about that concept toward the end of the video, because you're probably saying to yourself, well, what the hell is a standard player? Well, I'll tell you where I got that idea from a little bit later on. Let's just keep moving on here. So that's what it looked like when it came into box. I'm not going to do the whole unboxing thing. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted this turntable was because way back in 1992, some of you watching this video were probably not even born then. I walked into a Radio Shack store and I saw this particular little dumpy looking little turntable. And it's the one on the catalog page here that costs $99. It says semi-automatic with belt drive, and you have a switchable preamp. And one of the things that they were selling on this was the fact that it came with a magnetic cartridge. And that cartridge that's on there is an Audio-Technica AT3600. So that cartridge has been around for a long, long time. And those of you who with astute eyes and good observation skills have already noticed that the Pioneer Pl-990 has one that looks almost like it. So here it is sitting on top of my little stand there, plugged in, playing the first record. And the first record that I put on here was actually an Eddie Arnold record. He was an old country singer who was popular back in the 50s and 60s. That record's kind of tore up, so I figured if the turntable was messed up, I wouldn't be too upset. But then when Eddie Arnold played so well, I grabbed Crosby, Stills, and Nash and threw it on there. I wanted to hear what it sounded like when it was playing some rock and roll. So I put that on there, and that's when I snapped this picture. It was playing Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Anyway, back to the AT3600 cartridge. This particular cartridge has a long history, and it is the most popular cartridge in the world. They have sold more of these than any others, and it is the very low end of the Audio-Technica line, but it's actually not terrible. It has a 0.6 mil conical stylus, as compared to you guys probably who are more audio enthusiasts are used to hearing about elliptical styluses. Well, this is old school. It has an old conical stylus, which is basically shaped like a ball. Those are also called spherical styli, and this cartridge tracks at right around 3.5 grams. The specs on it are anywhere between 3 and 4 grams. It will be happy. Now that sounds like a lot, but it's not for a conical stylus. And there was a lot of research that was done on this probably about 50 years ago that I read, and pretty much with a conical stylus between 0.6 and 0.7, you can track that anywhere between 3.5 and 4 grams and not worry about damaging your records. Whereas an elliptical stylus, that's a little bit of a different story, because the stylus shape itself is more abrupt, and tracking with a lot of tracking force might cause damage to your records. But a conical stylus of the right shape and a pretty decent quality is not going to hurt your records tracking at 3.5 grams. I checked out the availability of styluses for this turntable, or styli. That would be the more proper way to say it. LP Gear is selling the exact Pioneer part number replacement. And according to the literature that I have read, this is a Pioneer cartridge, but it looks just like an AT3600, and it matches it almost to a T. And I happen to know that the AT3600 styli are interchangeable. LP Gear also sells a upgraded stylus for this particular turntable. They actually have 3 that cross-reference to the name, and the middle one is like $28, and I think that's still a spherical or conical stylus shape, and then they have an elliptical. I personally would never run an elliptical stylus on this turntable. First of all, you cannot change the tone arm. It's all locked in. It's actually very accurate and very precise, which really caught my attention because you think of a turntable with this kind of cost that there's going to be a lot of play in that, and it's not going to be accurate. It was. Not only does the turntable track at exactly 3.5 grams, it has dead-on anti-skate. So that was pretty amazing in a turntable of this level. So I have no problem whatsoever playing my records on this at all. The only thing that I would warn you about is that if you are using a spherical shaped stylus and you're tracking between 3 and 4 grams, that You pay very close attention to the wear on that stylus and be prepared to replace it often, because you do not want to play your records with a worn stylus if the turntable tracks at 3.5 grams. Another thing to keep in mind about that too is that when the stereo LP standard came out in 1957, at that point in time they were telling everybody to track at 6 grams. So records are actually supposed to be able to track with that kind of weight, and I've bought a lot of used records through the years, and I can tell you that as long as that stylus was replaced, even on those old players, if you played them, it didn't cause a great deal of damage. Now, you still come across a record every now and again that's obviously somebody played it with a worn stylus or played it dirty and sounds awful. So that's enough about stylus, or styluses, whatever you call them. Let's talk about something else really cool about this machine, and that's the fact that even though it is a low-end belt drive machine with a DC servo motor in it, the Pioneer Pl-990 comes with a built-in stroboscope that allows you to pinpoint speed accuracy. You can get it pretty close here. There are actually 2 adjustments for the speed. On the bottom of the turntable, there's a couple of little holes, and if you take a very tiny flathead jeweler's screwdriver and you push it up through there, you will actually go into the motor housing, and there are these tiny little trimmer pots that you can use to set the speed. Now, turntables that are built on this chassis that do not have the stroboscope on the front, that's how you set the speed. So you could get a strobe disc and you could make sure it was pretty close, but those little pots in that motor are so touchy that they're going to drift, and it's nice to be able to kind of dial it in on the front of the box as well and have some sort of visual indication that you're at least close to being on speed. That is one of the things about the cheaper turntables that do not have some way of checking the speed that bugs me, is because they're off speed, and some of them can be off by quite a bit. I've heard them being several tones sharp or flat because the speed's not right, and this you can get pretty much dead on. Now, I haven't run this machine very much before doing this video. I did notice that if you set the speed and then you go away and you play a couple of records and you go back and look at it again, that it might be, those dots might be moving one way or the other just slightly. It's not audible, but it does drift a little bit. And that could be a number of things. I think mainly what it has to do with is break-in time, because when you first start using a belt drive turntable, or any turntable for that matter, unless it's like, quartz lock direct drive and it has some sort of feedback to know what speed it's on, the belt has to stretch, the bearings have to work their way out, the motor's going through, it's all kind of breaking in. So I'm not too terribly worried about it. And even if it continues to be that unstable speed-wise, we're not talking about being off by much. It's just very tiny. As a matter of fact, I had a Pioneer PL518. There's a video up here about it on the YouTube channel that I had for years. And that turntable had the same performance, and it was direct drive. So there you go. You'd have to tweak it every now and again just to make sure you were in the ballpark. But these dots on these strobe, they can be moving a lot in one direction pretty fast, and you can't hear it. And I've got pretty close to perfect pitch. If I can't hear it, then most everybody else can't hear it. But the speed is very stable, and it's very smooth sounding. Pianos and violins and things like that, they sound very smooth, and there's no cogging or jerking and all that kind of stuff. The specifications call for 0.2, 0.5% for the wow and flutter. I think it's doing a little better than that. At least I can't hear it if it is, and I'm sure over time it will settle out. But I'm not really worried about it. I'm playing this, doing this to play old funky 45s that are off-center anyway, and they kind of go when you play it, so big deal. It's kind of okay by me. But it's a neat feature on such a low-end turntable to at least have some sort of way to figure out what speed you're at. And many of the way more expensive turntables that you can buy these days, the belt drives, they have no speed control whatsoever. It's engineered in, and you can't change it, and there's no way to know what's going on. I mean, it's like a lot of Riga turntables. They ship in such a way that when you get them, they run fast. So I thought that was a pretty cool feature that had to do with this particular machine. So what am I comparing this to? Well, those of you who have been watching this channel for a while will remember this turntable. This has been my main daily driver for quite some time. This is a Sony, and it is, I forget the model number off the top of my head, but this was made about 1986, and it is a linear tracking turntable, and what I have been running on it is an Audio-Technica 92E cartridge with a Shibata Stylus. So the stylus and cartridge for this particular machine costs about $175. When I bought this machine, I bought it used for like $275, $300, and it has been very nice to me. It is still hooked up, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm going to use this mainly for LPs. You see, I don't like to play 45s with a Shibata stylus. So what I have been doing is actually swapping cartridges. I have a Audio-Technica, what is it, a 3482P, and then I have a 0.6 mil stylus for that particular cartridge, and that's my 45 stylus. So I've been swapping them out, and the idea here is that if I want to play an LP, that I will be able to, use the Shibata stylus and everything will be cool. Shibata styluses and styrene records do not get along. I've heard horror stories about them ripping the grooves out of styrene records. Now, I have tried it. I have played some of my styrene 45s that I didn't really care that much about with the Shibata, and it didn't seem to damage anything, but still, that abrupt stylus shape is not good for tore up records. So I figured that's what the Pioneer will be good at, right? So here it is hooked up to the system, and it's in my rack here. So up top we have the Pioneer Pl-990, and the Pioneer Pl-990 has a built-in preamp. You can't switch it out, like I said in the beginning of the video. Fortunately, the preamp is actually quite good. I was afraid that it would be noisy. I've heard these in person before, but there's a difference between hearing it on your own system, and I was kind of afraid that the preamp would have hum in it or hiss or something like that. No, very quiet, very low distortion, and the frequency response is very nice. The Pioneer puts out a lot of bass. I was really impressed with that. I had a couple of AT3600 cartridges several years ago that I played around with, and one of the things that I noticed was that I didn't like the bass coming out of them. They didn't have a lot of bass. There's no intergroove distortion that I can hear, so the alignment on the Tonearm is pretty good, and it seems to work really well with this cartridge. I don't hear a lot of resonance. It's very, very pleasant, and one of the things that shocked me was the stereo. The stereo is really good coming out of this turntable. The channel separation and the imaging, it's very accurate. I had played around with AT3600 cartridges, and I had noticed before that it wasn't that great. So I was really kind of shocked at how well it sounded. I think this is a combination of Pioneer improving the stylus somewhat, maybe, on their particular version, if it's not just a straight rebadge, because it does sound better than the AT3600s I'd heard in the past. Also, I think it's the fact that the Tonearm, even though it's a short little stubby thing, is built around this particular cartridge. And also think that they were able to match the preamp electrically to the cartridge as far as impedance and inductance was concerned about right. I think that those three things in combination make it sound pretty good. Is it super duper clear, detailed, wonderful? Oh, what a wonderful! Not really. It's kind of smoothed over on the top end a little bit, but it does have a nice sweet sound to it. I'm going to tell you something though. I've paid a lot of money for cartridges that I've paid more money for cartridges than I paid for this entire turntable and heard worse and sent them back or sold them or got rid of them. not bad at all for the price. I mean, all of this has to be taken with the huge grain of salt that this is a $150 turntable. That's how much the whole thing costs. So whatever you get is pretty good. But I was actually able to do kind of an A-B comparison today a little bit between the Sony and this particular turntable. And they're neck and neck. They're not bad. It's kind of awesome, to tell you the truth. And they're both automatic turntables. I like automatic turntables. I know that true audiophiles hate automatic turntables, but I like to be able to just put the record on and sweep it with the brush and then push a button and have the stylus lowered gently onto the record. And the reason why is because even though I am a big fan of records and I worked on the radio, I'm old enough to remember being on the radio playing records live on the air. I have never been terribly ginger with that particular thing there. You know, I mean, I always fumble the Tonearm and I end up dropping the stylus and that sort of thing. And so therefore, I really like automatic turntables because then I, feel like I have less of a risk of breaking the stylus or scratching a record or something like that. So in general, it was really shocking. Also, the turntable is pretty well isolated, which is another shock. You can actually tap this table while it's playing a record and you can't really hear it. Now, if there's no audio going on, yeah, you can hear a little bit of a tap, but it's not like it doesn't skip or anything like that. That's pretty cool as well. I mean, for just a plastic case and that sort of thing. Doesn't seem to be any freaky room resonance in there as well. I don't hear anything goofy going on like that. Like, when you have a turntable that's in a plastic box like that, you always run the risk of having the resonance of that particular box be transmitted to the Tonearm, and so you have your speakers on, and then you get, it's not necessarily feedback, but it's just sort of like a, this awareness. It kind of, the bass notes become kind of mushy because of that, kick drums and things like that, because the thing's actually ringing. Not too bad, maybe a little tiny bit, but not too bad. So that was pretty cool. All in all, I like this turntable a lot. So before I wrap up the video, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I was talking about earlier about being a standard player. And that comes from, it comes from an article that I read several years ago. And I wish that I could remember who wrote it and where I read it and what it was all about, because I'd like to share it. Most folks would probably find what I was reading very tedious, because what it was about was an engineering standard for the cutting of masters to make records from. And we're talking about record lathes cutting the master disc that they would make the matrix from. And the concept was that what an engineer should do is try to target the velocities cut into the record and the frequency response in such a way that it will play back properly on a 0.6 mil stylus, conical. And of course, engineers don't really have any concept of trying to record the records themselves to a standard. They never have. There's never has been a standard for reproducing records. And that's why we have so many different stylus shapes out there. And there's all sorts of different opinions on proper tracking force and that sort of thing. But what they were talking about was a stylus that was 0.6 mil and tracked it, had a certain compliance, which would be like this, which is medium compliance, and it tracks at 3.5 grams and that sort of thing. So the Pioneer Pl-990 fits that bill of being the quote-unquote standard reproducer. So it's kind of a good middle ground to see what records are doing, as long as it has a nice stylus on it, and just to see how the engineers cut them, And if you have some sort of really advanced stylus shape, like a hyperelliptical or a Shibata or a micro line stylus or something like that, you may find that some records sound good and some don't. And that's because of the way they're cut and how that stylus is writing in the groove and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm kind of curious, since I do have a Shibata and I've been listening to a lot of records with it, if I play them on this, what's the difference and how's that going to sound? So yeah, this kind of is like the lowest common denominator standard reproducer that all of the engineers that were cutting records back in the 70s and 80s, that they were thinking about that this would be the kind of turntable that they would be played on. So it makes a really nice place to listen to those records, those old records. Now, if you have new records that have really high velocities because they're intended for an audiophile market, then playing it on a turntable like this might be quite disappointing. But I'll tell you the truth, I played a couple of pretty high velocity recordings today, and this thing tracks really well. And I was really kind of shocked. I know I didn't have time to like go through the whole record collection and listen to a whole bunch of stuff, but a few of the things I played on it were ones that I know on other machines I would get distortion of some sort, whether it be sibilance or some sort of a buzz if there was too much modulation, and I didn't really hear it in this. I was kind of shocked. I was like, this is cool. So I've been chasing this thing about getting finer stylus shapes and more accurate this and the linear tracking turntable and all that stuff. And what it really comes down to is, I have found that what it really comes down to is how well the cartridges match to the Tonearm and how well the Tonearm is set up to the cartridge. So there is some merit in the idea of having a turntable where all of that is already engineered in. And it's not something that you can change. It's not adjustable. Because one of the old maxims that I learned years ago in the world of radio engineering was that if it's adjustable, it's most likely off. And that is certainly true of turntables. So if you have even a cheap turntable with a really well-engineered Tonearm, it can outperform a much more expensive turntable that has a cartridge that is mismatched to the arm and the arm itself is not well aligned. Which leads me to another thing about this machine. It comes with a very thin rubber mat. And if you get a hold of one of these things, you might be tempted to upgrade that mat with a thicker mat. Don't do it. You will throw the balance of the Tonearm off. You're not going to get the correct vertical tracking angle, and you're not going to get the right tracking force because of the way the Tonearm is balanced. So you really want to kind of stick to that rubber mat. It's not bad. It's okay. I tried a thicker mat on it today, and I actually thought it didn't sound as good as it did with the really cheap, super thin mat that comes with it. So if I ever have to replace this mat, probably what I would end up doing, and it really sounds crazy because these things sell for $50, but would be to get a really thin cork mat and put it on it. That would seem to me to be almost a better choice than the rubber that's here. But as is, it's not bad. And at this price, run it for a year, and when you need a new stylus, buy a new turntable. That is, if they continue to make them. I don't know anything for sure, but it would just seem to me that Pioneer may be considering moving on to greener pastures after at least 21 years of production on this particular model. So anyway, gang, thank you for watching the video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed playing around with the turntable, and I'm going to keep playing with it. Like I said, I kind of played with it off and on today. I spun some 45s on it, listened to about 3 or 4 album sides, and I was really impressed. It was very nice. The audio that came out of it was balanced. The channels were balanced. The frequency response was nice. It has great thumping bass coming out of this thing, that's for sure. And the stereo imaging was better than I expected. No, not quite as good as like a, like a higher end Audio-Technica cartridge. Like the even the AT, the AT92E, which is what I'm using in the Sony. That has a little better stereo separation, but it wasn't so much the separation as much as the positioning and the balance was really nice. So yeah, I could listen to this turntable, not a problem. Thank you for watching. I certainly do appreciate it, and we will talk again soon.